Hello, everyone. Welcome to the launch of Business Schools for Climate Leadership at the Sustainable Innovation Forum at COP26 in Glasgow, Scotland. My name is Peter Tofano, and I will be the moderator for today's event, which is being held in partnership with Intent. As this is a new organization and we're launching a new toolkit for managers, I'd like to take a few minutes to explain the origins and purpose of Business Schools for Climate Leadership in this session. Well, here in Glasgow, leaders from government, from business, and civil society are joining for the 26th time as the warning signs of climate crisis become ever more obvious and the scientific evidence ever more clear. Arresting the flow of greenhouse gases into the atmosphere and the seas is a global imperative, and therefore all sectors need to focus on mitigation measures. Yet as the recent IPCC report makes clear, even with Herculean mitigation efforts, we and our children and our grandchildren will have to adapt to more extreme temperature fluctuations, to more extreme precipitation patterns, to sea level rise and more. Governments will have to act by passing and enforcing laws and regulations. Consumers will have to act by changing everything that we do, from heating our homes to how we move from place to place. And businesses will have to act to change how we operate and what goods and services we provide. For businesses, some of the work ahead will involve being more efficient, emitting far fewer greenhouse gases, using far less natural resources, generating less net waste. But businesses will also have to be innovative in what they do and to create new products and services that are appropriate given the climate crisis that we face. This will take new business models, new metrics, new financing vehicles, new incentive and reward systems, new R&D activities. This newness is being celebrated here at the Sustainable Innovation Forum, alongside of the main tent nearby at COP26. In addition to new innovations, businesses will need to collaborate more than ever, collaborate with one another, collaborate across sectors with government, partner with civil society organizations. Greater efficiency, changes in core business practices, greater innovation, new products and services, and enhanced collaboration. That's an incredibly large menu to require of businesses and business leaders. As business schools, we pride ourselves on training these business leaders. We proudly note our graduates who have gone on to found and run some of the most important firms in the world. We're going to hear from our panelists about what their schools are doing in research, teaching, and convening. But is that enough? And can we succeed if we only work by ourselves? If so much is demanded of business, what must we as business schools do? In February 2020, a group of 8 deans met in Paris on the eve of what would become a global lockdown. I remember the meeting clearly. I was worried about this thing called COVID. There we were in Paris. Collectively, we represented over 400,000 alumni and over 50,000 students and executive participants each year. And we agreed to do something that we had never agreed to do before, which is to lay down our competitive swords and do what we were teaching businesses to do, to collaborate to battle the climate crisis. No matter how excellent our own work would be, we'd be even stronger if we worked together. At the time, I was one of those deans. I was the Dean of Site Business School at the University of Oxford, and I was proud to be part of this group, which included my counterparts at Cambridge Judge Business School, HEC, IE Business School, IESE Business School, the International Institute for Management Development, or IMD, INSEAD, and London Business School. While we would continue to compete for students and faculty and donors, we agreed to try to collaborate to support business leaders to innovate and to deal with the climate emergency. We then charged a set of our colleagues to get to work, and the result is Business Schools for Climate Leadership. And our first product is the toolkit that we're about to launch. Before I introduce the team that has created this toolkit, let's hear from the deans of the founding members of Business Schools for Climate Leadership.
The business world recognizes today that the planet is under major stress. And as business schools, we do impact business and society through research, education, and actions. And we do so to contribute to a more inclusive, prosperous, and sustainable world. Facing the climate crisis, we cannot operate in silos. We need to collaborate at global scale. Business School for Climate Leadership is precisely a unique alliance of 8 leading European business schools, implementing such collaboration at many levels. As Dean of HEC Paris, I'm really proud to be one of the 8 deans supporting this initiative.
I don't think business schools have done nearly enough to address the challenge of climate change. The reason is very simple. No organization, no government, no company has done enough. We need to focus our minds on this monumental threat to humanity. I look forward to collaborating with our peer schools in this effort.
Solving the critical challenges of climate change requires collective action at a global level down to grassroots actions. Within IE Business School, our community is incredibly excited about and rallying behind this initiative, this alignment of business schools for climate leadership. We have our students putting their energies into climate leadership clubs. We have our faculty incorporating climate leadership content into our programs and courses. And we have alumni reaching out to us to get involved in this topic because they see it as so important, not only for the future of education and business, but also for the world.
At Oxford Said, we believe in training business leaders to take a systemic approach to tackling world-scale problems, but we also believe in leading by example through listening and collaborating with those who share our values. That is why we are so proud to be part of the business schools for climate leadership. The climate emergency is frankly the biggest threat we face, and we have a responsibility as leaders and indeed as educators to step up to this challenge. I hope our friends, alumni and clients will join us in this fight.
INSEAD has long understood the power of business to be a force for good, and that business schools are the engine for developing the responsible leaders needed to drive positive change. Collective action is essential. And by working together with other schools through the initiative and the toolkit, we have an amazing opportunity to educate, inspire, and inform a powerful and diverse global network of current and future business leaders.
Business can be and should be a force for good on all relevant issues in society. Here we have probably the most important issue of our times. So here's an opportunity for business to be that force for good. And as business schools, we can equip business with the leadership tools, with the insights, with the know-how to actually transform the economy in the way that is needed now.
Big challenges require big collaborations. Business schools from across Europe recognize the opportunity of coming together to fuel the movement towards solutions. Let us, together, inspire and support the business community to repair the planet and protect our lives.
As educators and researchers, as well as stewards of powerful alumni bodies, we need to work together to protect humanity. The lessons in this toolkit will arm executives with the skills and insights to take bold action, not only to mitigate the effects of climate change, but also to understand the business risks and seize the opportunities ahead. Tackling the climate crisis cannot be done alone. This is why we are working together. Climate leadership to the power of 8.
It was great to be part of that group, but it's even greater to be part of this group, the group of more than 80 people from our 8 schools that have come together to launch Business Schools for Climate Leadership, to put together this toolkit, and to begin a journey together. These colleagues include faculty members from each of our schools, our colleagues who run important initiatives and centers, our marketing and comms teams, and of course, our deans. This core team has been meeting often many times a week, and I probably count hundreds and hundreds of emails from the members of the BS4CL team. I think it's fair to say that we've come to know each other, to respect one another, to see each other as kindred spirits and comrades in arms in the battle against this climate emergency. Today, I am proud to be joined by Professor Knut Hannes from IMD, Professor Jennifer Howard Grenville from Cambridge Judge Business School, Professor Mike Rosenberg of IESA Business School, and Professor Concepcion Caldon of IE Business School. Let's talk to this great group. You and everyone else were super busy before we started, before BS4CL. And you already had been working on this topic in your role as the London Professor of Sustainability at IMD. Why did you accept the invitation by your dean to take part in this group? And what are your hopes for us collectively?
You know, Peter, this just feels important. It feels like it's a moment we have to grasp. There's huge purpose to doing this, and there's lots of opportunities as well. So that's really why. And I've always been a believer that we can do a lot of things by ourselves, but we can do so much more together. So this feels to me like the invitation I'd been waiting for, to be honest. And I want it to be something big and important and shape something for the future.
Right. Concepcion, you're leading IE's Sustainable Impact Teaching and Research at that sustainable office at the school. You have a full-time job promoting academic content on sustainability across schools and programs, encouraging research, and more. Tell us a little bit about what you were doing at IE and why take on this additional task? What can we do that you couldn't do at IE? What's it like to collaborate with otherwise competitors?
Well, individually, we do all, as Knut said, already play a very important role in front of our communities, right? Our constituencies. However, when we come together, we are capable of setting the tone, the culture for what sound management looks like, which is something that we can't do as strongly individually. The other thing, or the other reason to come together is because I do think that all of our alumni, all of the managers that are joining us in this webinar during COP26 right now, they should probably get on the phone with the CEOs of their competitors and work together. And this sets the example. We've been talking at business school about competition, for a long time. We have come together before, usually when it comes to regulation, lobbying, industry-related affairs. But climate change is important enough. It's not been easy to work together, but it's been an amazing experience. And if we can do it, our students, our alumni, they can do it too. And I think that sets not only the tone, but the example of the kind of difficult work, but valuable work that we would like to see of them.
Great. So I think that's enough about us. Let's get to the content here. What we've been working on over the last few months is a toolkit that is supposed to be helpful to managers and to leaders as they're kind of dealing with the issue of the climate emergency that we face right now. Jen, maybe you can kind of launch us on this discussion. The toolkit has two frames, outside in and inside out. Can you explain generally what we were trying to do and what these 8 sections of the toolkit, how they all fit together?
Sure. Thanks, Peter. I mean, as you know, when we came together, there were a whole host of topics that we could potentially have explored. But as we do in our research and teaching, we like to break things down and help people understand the context in which, or the contextual environment in which business action and innovation needs to take place. So the first 4 chapters of the toolkit really orient us to think about what do business leaders need to know about where the world is going? And how do they need to orient to a climate-constrained world and all of the broad implications that will have for their business for decades to come? So we framed the first 4 chapters around this outside-in perspective. How can business leaders think about these macro shifts that are associated with climate change, but not limited to climate change? And how will that reflect on what their business needs to do in terms of adaptation and innovation in years to come? So we orient 4 chapters around, for example, climate change and inequality, climate change and nature, climate change and geopolitics, and climate change and technology. But then, as we know, when we teach our future business leaders in our schools, we need to give them the tools to think differently about how do you reorient a business and its capabilities and its expertise, its structure, its processes, and its innovation in order to move forward in this new world. And so there we take, as you mentioned, a sort of inside out perspective of the next 4 chapters to propose again for managers some questions that they need to ask around themes like climate change and business transformation, climate change and decarbonization, climate change and risk mitigation, and of course, climate change and enterprise value. So we hope that the toolkit of the 8 chapters is really provocative in terms of setting the stage for where the world is going for business, and then giving some discrete tools and ways of thinking about how to orient one's business towards these.
Thanks. Let's pick that directly up with Mike. So Mike, let's talk about the outside in chapters. So maybe you can get us started, why these 4 outside in chapters? And maybe you can start with some of the ones that may not be as obvious to the CEOs and business leaders who are listening, inequality or geopolitics. What's that all about?
Well, Peter, one of the convictions I have is at the operational level, we can trust the vice presidents of most companies to do the right thing. Because, if you use less materials, if you use less energy, et cetera, you'll save money. So the business case for operational sustainability is fairly well established. What we tried to do in the toolkit, especially from the outside in, is go kind of beyond the usual suspects to things that people don't normally think about, but we think they should think about. Because that's kind of our role as educators, to tell people not only what they already know they need to do, but what they need to think about. So the impact, climate change, as you mentioned, the fires, the storms, increased drought is changing the world already. It's having impacts all across these areas, and it's important to get our heads wrapped around it. Geopolitics, for example, the area that I specialize in, I've already been writing for years about my conviction that companies need to spend more time thinking about geopolitics, and climate change will make the current set of tensions that we have on the planet potentially worse. They will push countries which are already fragile, perhaps even to failing, opening up space for non-state actors like Boko Haram and Al-Shabaab, pushing societies to extreme situations which will cause immigration or migration away from these places, which will destabilize other countries, and this could have regional implications. Now the good news is, at least from a geopolitical point of view, if you ask Graham Allison, the former dean of the Kennedy School of Government, he'd say that the fact that China and the United States have to cooperate on climate might actually help them cooperate on a host of other issues, and might actually take us, away from the brink of this Cold War 2.0, which we're kind of falling into if nothing else happens. Now, if we apply that same kind of logic to inequality, my colleague Mark Stiles from INSEAD, has a huge body of work talking about how it's often the poorest people in societies who pay the brunt of climate change if it does happen, and also pay for some of the mitigation policies we have. If you make green energy and it's a little bit more expensive, well, the wealthy people, that's okay. But for poorer people, that's a problem. All of these issues, Jen has done, and her colleagues at Cambridge do amazing work on how climate change and nature are related and linked together. And climate change is affecting nature, but if we don't protect nature, we are going to accelerate rather than mitigate climate change. And Conchita and her team have done amazing work on technology, because technology innovation is all around us. The question is, can we harness some of that technological innovation to make things better? So all of these things are looked at from a climate change perspective, Peter. And what we're trying to do is get people out of what they're normally looking at and looking at things which are to some degree predictable. We know what the impacts are going to be. And even in the best scenarios, some of these changes will be with us anyway for the next 5, 10, or 15 years. So since we know what's going to happen, and we know where it's going to happen, and now's the time to play. To finish, from a business point of view, peace and prosperity, and these are fundamental aspects without which we cannot do business. So if you take the long-term business case to protect nature, to keep the world safe, to develop new technology, and to make sure that our societies are somewhat equal, not completely equal, but to not allow this inequality to grow. All of these things are things which we believe are in the long-term interest for society and business.
Thank you. So let's stay on this outside in. I mean, 2 of these seem to be about, tensions, the tensions between countries, the tensions between classes within countries. And I think your argument, Mike, if I understand it correctly, as well as the argument for Mark from INSEAD, is that climate is going to intensify these tensions, and business has to understand those tensions in order to do what exactly, right? So there are rising tensions in the world exacerbated by climate, but what are the specific implications for business? And maybe not just to you, Mike, but to anybody. And then we'll get on to nature and technology.
Just to start on the geopolitical implications, I mean, we know already certain countries and certain regions of the world which are in trouble and getting worse. Now, business can either try to help or can choose not to invest in those regions. You know, this is a choice. I would hope that some companies would choose to invest because that will actually make things better. So there's a whole range. I think each company is different. Every business is in its own space. But the issue is, can you actually look at where you're doing business around the world, understand what the changes are, and take steps to keep your own people safe, to keep your customers safe, and to build a business which will last for the future. It's about doing the math, really.
Okay. Others on that, you know, how we think about these rising tensions as a result of climate change.
If I can chime in, Peter, I mean, I absolutely agree. You know, and put this way, you realize that you take already an incredibly complex and urgent issue, climate change, which we're all talking about, and you sort of multiply it, you amplify it by some of the implications that Mike has been addressing. On the other hand, I think it also drives the urgency for businesses to think really broadly about themselves as a business across their value chain, and to investigate where are the climate impacts that may not be obvious. It might not be about our own, you know, carbon mitigation strategy or our own energy efficiency or adopting renewables for our own operations. And the conditions that Mike describes, you know, we have global supply chains, and we know that there are many communities around the world who are impacted socially and ecologically, you know, through these actions, through climate change effects. And so I think as businesses start to orient more towards that end of the value chain, as well as sort of the customer and client end of the value chain, and really ask again, where is the world going? Where will these hotspots arise? We don't know exactly when, where, and how, but we do know the broad trends. And so taking that longer term view, it might be through a risk mitigation lens, or it might be through an opportunity lens. There will be new needs to serve, and ultimately businesses are capable of addressing new needs and innovating like no other entity. So I think we need to worry about the tensions and the sort of interactions that we're talking about, but we also really need to keep optimistic about the opportunities for those businesses who do orient towards those problems to solve.
And Peter, if I could just jump in again, I mean, water is a huge issue. Water stress is a huge issue. Sanitation is a huge issue. These are huge business opportunities, you know, and the transition to a low carbon economy is probably the biggest business opportunity any of us will ever see in, you know, hundreds of years. We have to rebuild the world. And that's going to be amazing.
Yeah. Let's stick on this. I think, you know, one takeaway that I take from these first couple of chapters is that all these systemic factors are interrelated. As we saw with COVID, COVID was a public health nightmare, but it was also an economic nightmare. It was also a supply chain nightmare, as we're experiencing now. It was also a political kind of calamity, and all of those things fit together. And I think some of these first couple of chapters are all about how it is that climate intersects with inequality and geopolitics, but also with nature, obviously. And Jen, the work that you did for the toolkit, you know, there's terms like nature-based solutions and biodiversity that I think a lot of CEOs would scratch their heads and say, exactly, what do you mean by that? So when we talked about nature and the outside-in perspective around nature, what are the takeaways from that for a CEO or for a leader of a business organization?
Yeah, thanks, Peter. So it's been fascinating for me because here at Cambridge, we have actually a number of experts through our Cambridge Conservation Initiative Center, which brings together academics and leading NGOs in conservation, and Sir Partha Dasgupta, who's a emeritus professor of economics, just authored the Dasgupta Review, which was commissioned by Her Majesty's Treasury to essentially do for nature and biodiversity what the Stern Report did for climate, which is draw attention to the need for us as economies and as businesses within them to actually start to think of nature as an asset. And what I learned was fascinating. And Kittel Gauvin has done also work and published in this area of the interactions between climate change and nature, again, amplifying negative effects. So we know that what is often called nature-based solutions, nature sequesters a huge amount of carbon on the planet and is a key resource. So preserving and protecting forests, for example, and woodlands, not just the trees, but the soils, is central to our capacity to continue to absorb the significant amount of carbon that nature absorbs. So the Amazon rainforest alone hold a decade's worth of carbon emissions, man-made carbon emissions. Losing more of that resource will be devastating. So the urgency to protect and restore nature to enable carbon mitigation and climate mitigation is enormous. On the other hand, there are other more subtle ways that nature provides essentially for free some of the benefits that will begin to erode as climate change intensifies. So for example, coastal wetlands are an incredible resource for preventing some of the more devastating effect of floods. So business leaders need to start thinking about, as I'm taking my climate mitigation actions, am I also orienting in a way that will be protective of nature, or is it harming of nature? Renewables are fantastic, obviously, for reducing our reliance on fossil fuels, but they don't come for free in relation to nature. So I think business leaders can really start to ask questions, not just about nature, but around these other questions. By taking this positive step on climate, what am I also doing, positive or negative, in terms of another impact? And is there a way to find that sweet spot where we can optimize what we might call a nature positive outcome, or an inequality positive outcome, or a technology positive outcome alongside a climate positive outcome?
Great. I think I'm going to put a pause question in that we'll all answer later. Why should I care? So let's just leave that one at the end. Let's talk about why should I care about nature positive, inequality positive, socially positive. But before we get there, because that's a good place to end, let's finish up on this outside-in perspective. Concepcion, or Conchita, if I may, you wrote about technologies and all the technologies that are out there. This seems like more bread and butter for business executives. So give us a sense, because if they haven't been watching carefully about all the technological opportunities, or at least the fixes that might be there, give us a sense of what the market in terms of technology is offering us up as a set of possible solutions.
The first thing that I need to say is innovation and technology is the space for business in sustainability. Like, it's the natural space for business in sustainability to create new materials, new products, new business models. You were talking, we need to heat our homes differently. Well, someone needs to come up with that. We need to source our energy differently. Well, someone needs to sell us whatever it is, right, that we can buy around that. So the first message is look into this concept of innovability, sustainability as an innovation lever for your company, because you might have business opportunities there. I agree with Mike, you might be in front of the biggest business opportunity ever, and you don't want to miss on this. Now, if you're looking for already available off-the-shelf technologies that you can use, there's a wealth of options out there right now, which are reasonably priced for very many applications. So it is not true that carbon-intensive futures are cheaper, than more environmentally friendly futures. It's about what learning curve you want to undergo. And it is not very smart right now to insist in the wrong learning curve, because even if it's just due to regulation and taxation, it's going to have a ridiculous cost. So you might as well just invest in the right technology. So there, you have, first of all, amazing technology to track your environmental impact. You don't know what impact you're having, how on earth are you going to manage it? And you might be investing in the wrong place, and you might not be getting the bang for your buck, in terms of the investments that you're doing right now in reducing your carbon footprint. The other important thing is, what energy are you consuming? Because hydropower is very reasonably priced for many applications. Wind power, solar. We're working hard on making green hydrogen reasonably priced. It's not very reasonably priced right now for very many applications, but it soon might be. So there's very many options, and there's AI solutions to integrate them so that you can use them in ways that make sense to you. Do you even know what energy you're consuming? Because there might be good options there for you. Being more efficient in the way in which you use energy, you can go for car sharing solutions, optimized freight management, which is also good for your cost management, which you're going to love. Building management solutions, you can save up to 30% in your energy just by using these AI-based and digital-based systems. ICT is moving to the cloud. If you're still not there, you're going to have a great tool, and you're going to be more energy efficient. Material efficiency, what materials are you using? green cement, huge thing, green steel, huge thing. In terms of fabrics, there's amazing new fabrics made of recycled fabric. So there's so many options, for companies to use. So this basically technology offering these two opportunities. First, use technology to improve your operations and reduce your carbon footprint. It's there for you, right there available. Second, develop technology and come up with amazing business models, because there's a lot of revenue and a lot of profit to be made if you're smart and quick enough.
You make it sound so simple, so easy. Why isn't everybody doing this? Except it's not so simple. It's not so easy. And this is a good transition, I think, to the inside out perspective. This is going to require changes in purchasing patterns, changes in business models, changes in reward and incentive systems, changes in everything. You've been writing about, thinking about business transformation in climate. Everything we've heard so far suggests there's a real need, and Conchita is saying, yeah, and the technology is there. But is it that simple? So what's it going to take for businesses, real businesses, to make progress here and change their business models and transform themselves?
So, first of all, there is a huge job to be done. So part of the job is, if you look at sort of what's going to help us reach our objectives, 30% maybe can be kind of solved by demand, by the consumer, etc. 70% has to be solved by, in some kind of way, the businesses. So there's a huge job to be done. That's the first point. Secondly, I think in doing that, we need all the types of business activity we have. So we have, 1.3 million fast-growing technology startups in the world. We need them, and they are focusing on developing new solutions for the future. We need big companies to transform. Many are, not all, but all will, because they will have to. I saw a statistic that 60+% of the Fortune 500 companies have stranded assets in some kind of way that will be challenged because of climate. They all have to move. They all have to move. So in a way, we're in a world where we have to change, but we're also in a world where it's a great opportunity to change. Here's a statistic. 65% of private equity invest into ESG companies. Why? Because that's where they find the highest value creation. Most of that goes into energy in some kind of way, renewables, different solutions around energy. So in a way, what do we have here? We have a huge opportunity. But then we also, as business schools, have a major job to be done in terms of the leadership side of this. This is not mechanics. This is not just putting together Legos. This is us working on driving the change, developing the leaders of today and of the future. It's almost like combining the head, the heart, and the hands. And we are business schools. Our job is to actually work together to make that transition happen. And in our chapters in the digital toolbook, we are getting started. So we're looking at the business transformation. We're looking at new business models. We're looking at risk management and risk assessment. We're looking at the new ways of doing accounting, which is almost like the infrastructure for business. And then, as you said, Conchita, we're looking at the innovation and technologies. All of these areas are, in my opinion, the flip side of the anxiety, the flip side of the depressive nature of climate. They are the opportunities and the potential of climate as well. We have to look at both. And we are business schools. We have to try to deliver the leadership today and in the future. But that's I think a great blessing to be able to work on it. And there's so many ways we can work on it individually, but also I think together, Peter.
Well, let's stick on this inside out view. The interesting thing about this team that we've created across all 8 schools is that we have economists, we have people who come from the social sciences, from organization as well. So, if we think about some of the chapters that Knut was just talking about, a couple were written largely by economists. So, the chapter that I collaborated with my colleagues on risk management, how do we think about risk management and risk management systems, or the work on accounting systems that our colleagues at LBS have done. But then there's the soft side of it. How do we actually change organizations? So maybe we can stick on, you said two sides, which is opportunity and threat, or there are two sides of everything. So let's think about these two sides, about what are the hard things we're going to do, which is to say quantitative measures, and what are the things that we're going to have to do to change our organizations. Maybe we can talk a little bit, and none, we don't have our colleagues, because only 4 of us could get to be on the stage today from LBS, but maybe we can kind of collectively talk about accounting, and I can pitch in about risk management. How are we going to have to change accounting systems in order to make this work? What's the role of accounting in business, and how might climate change the way that we think about business? Anyone want to take that on, or would you like me to do that?
I'll give it a 1-minute start, and then I'm sure all of us can jump in different ways. But it feels to me that there are 2 questions we need to answer. One is, what is our performance of any given firm compared to their competitors? The second question is, how does our firm do compared to last year? In other words, we need to be able to measure. We used to measure financials. Now we're increasingly going to be measuring ESG as well, the kind of non-material, the ecological, the social, the governance side of business performance as well. When we do that, and when we get transparency around it, we can make the choices that actually are made for the future. I think of it very simply. We needed a set of accounting to build kind of the infrastructures of the last century, and we need a new accounting to build the infrastructures, the companies, and the businesses for the future. But I'm very optimistic because I see they're coming. IFRS is an example. And I see that investors and banks are responding to it. So already now this is moving, and that's just going to continue. So that's my somewhat optimistic perspective of that, Peter.
And in fact, next door in COP26, I think there's a number of announcements that are going to be made around IFRS and how climate accounting will change. There's an old saw that says you manage what you measure. And I have a t-shirt that I would wear on a different occasion that says accountants will save the world. And some of my accounting colleagues would agree with that, that in fact, until we start to measure these things. For example, another of my colleagues has a paper that's really quite interesting because it looks at what internal price do people put on carbon in different firms. And the range of prices that firms are using for carbon in internal accounting is extraordinarily wide. Now that can't be the case because carbon probably has one price. But the reason they don't is because otherwise they would have environmental bankruptcies. It's super, not just interesting, but important. And I think firms will almost immediately start to see they're being asked to provide information around this. Another, please,
I was going to say, Peter, I'd love to jump in because I think what you're saying, combining the sort of the hard and the soft, this area in particular is ripe for. I couldn't agree more about the importance for standardization and transparency. And the great positive news is we're moving very quickly, and that will help everyone. But as you pointed out, we manage what we measure. We also need to be really cautious about these measurements because we all know that they're still rather nascent and they're imperfect. And even establishing robust financial accounting standards took some time. So we need to recognize that we're still in the early days here, despite the fact that we're moving very quickly to address these urgent needs. And I've written separately on this in Harvard Business Review, basically pointing out that yes, we need all these measurements, but we also need to be mindful of the fact that at the end of the day, we're often proxying for things that are really much more complex. And so I don't want to hark back entirely to this sort of outside in perspective, but the interactions are incredibly complex. So when we do reach and achieve a more set of sort of open, transparent, and standardized metrics, we also need to have business leaders be really curious about what's underlying those, what's driving those, and keep innovating, as Conchita said, and keep experimenting and keep building their knowledge and deepening their knowledge, because only then will we be convinced that actually what we're managing is impact at the end of the day, rather than some proxy that is easier to measure. So I think that's really important. Business leaders need to start thinking in terms of paradoxes, in terms of, both management through measurement, but also management through curiosity and adaptation and innovation and experimentation and quick learning. We need leaders who are ambidextrous, who are comfortable with the numbers and the uncertainty and the thinking that comes with both of those.
If I might add, actually, I think Jen just touched on something that is very important that I like to tell my students about in class often, which is the importance of systems thinking. And understanding, right, that we are a system together with nature and we are a system amongst ourselves. And it also speaks to, Mike's point about the geopolitics of this all and the relationship between technology development and inequality, which are very much connected, and the impact of new technologies in nature and all of these things. And we really need leaders who can have the systems thinking, the systems approach. And the problem that we have with present accounting is that it doesn't capture all of the relevant information. So the last century's accounting is not fulfilling its role to provide a clear and true picture of the status of the company. It is not, because it is only providing a partial picture of the status of the company, but it's not accounting for other variables that connect the company with other realities, which exposes the company to risks that are then in turn difficult to manage because many leaders are not even ready to get their head around those risks. So I do agree, and the systems thinking, I think, is a valuable thing that is conveyed through the toolkit. When you see all of the different chapters, at least when I was reading through all of your chapters that the rest of you wrote, I could clearly see the effects of the kinds of things that I analyzed and the kinds of things that you were talking about, which is very complex, but we definitely need to get our head around all of this complexity and the implications of everything that we do for everything else.
Mike?
And Peter, if I could just add one more point to this, because Daniel at HEC has done a wonderful job of talking about decarbonization. And decarbonization is another chapter in the toolkit, because the way to decarbonize in a company is not so obvious. Yes, there's technology. Yes, there's choices. There's choices about product development. There's issues of what price to put on carbon, whether it's $60 a ton or $30 a ton. Someday there might be carbon taxes, which many people believe could be a silver bullet, but maybe it's not going to be that, and maybe it's not going to fix everything. But this consideration of how to decarbonize, how fast to decarbonize, and whether it's 2030, 2035, or 2040. And then in many industries, entirely new technological fields have to be developed in order to make, things like glass bottles with green hydrogen. You have to get hydrogen hot enough. So it's a tremendous topic. And I just wanted to mention Daniel's chapter on decarbonization, because I think it's very important.
Thank you. Just to finish off on the chapters, if you take, Conchita's point about thinking in terms of systems, which is the core of what we do at Oxford. There's a couple of tenets if you want to do systems thinking. First of all, you need to think in terms of long horizons, and you have to think in terms of an uncertain future. And all that's at the core of one of the other chapters that we have in the toolkit, which is about risk management. So risk managers can't just look backwards and take measures. They actually have to look forwards and try to understand how might the world evolve. One of the tools that's being used by risk managers increasingly is scenario analysis. There's a recent survey that looks at how risk managers using scenario analysis. They're beginning to use it more, but there's 8 or 10 or 12 different scenarios. Just next door at COP26, if we look at the various scenarios that are coming out of science-based targets and other things, there's lots and lots of different ways to characterize what the future might look like in terms of climate. And increasingly, business managers and risk managers and CEOs are going to have to kind of figure that out, not to know which future it's going to be, but all those futures are plausible. Speaking of plausible futures, we only have a few minutes left. So I just want to kind of ask some broader questions. What are the things that you're seeing in business concretely and in business schools that give you hope that we can make progress? So maybe just quick fire answers. What things are you seeing, a business or something you're seeing in your school that says, we can actually make progress on this? Who wants to start?
I'll be happy to start, because I just wanted to say one thing, which is we want to change because it's important for our students. but our students also want us to change because it's important for them. So I think that's what makes me most optimistic here. I see students today looking at exactly these issues and saying, these are the most important issues. This is what I want to be working on. So that to me is important. And then secondly, I also see something I haven't seen if I go back 10 years, which is totally new business models. So I see these kind of circular models, waste reduction models, new ways of being more energy efficient, etc. And I haven't seen the kind of, I've seen the ideas, but I haven't seen the scaling. And now I'm starting to see the scaling as well. So I'd say kind of the young students gives me lots of optimism, but also the innovation I see from established companies and all those startups out there as well. And that taken together, I mean, we're doing things today that we really weren't doing 5 years ago or 10 years ago. In Paris, we didn't even talk about net zero. Now it's our reality, everyday reality, you know?
I can just jump in because Knut, I was going to say students as well. I mean, I think the demand is there and students are obviously future employees and they're starting to ask questions. I've heard of some of our fellow top schools basically arming their graduating students with questions to ask about climate action and sustainability for their future employees. They're arming them with the data of top employers in terms of their climate actions and climate strategies and climate performance. And so if a business needs to take a long-term perspective, it's not just because of risk, it's so that they can get talent walking in the door, and that so that the students that we train and our peers around the world are training are actually working towards a future that they want. And I think that is one of the things that gives me the most optimism.
Yeah, change also in executive education students. Just this weekend, we had an executive education alumni forum at IE, and I was teaching in a session beside another professor, super good professor, talking about big data, and a third professor at the same time talking about EU subsidies. And I was talking about sustainability. And I thought, no one's going to choose my session. Well, guess what? A lot of students did choose my session, and they were very interested. This is, again, executive education students, alumni, and they were coming to me over coffee to tell me about their companies. I'm in a family business in agriculture. I'm in the plastics industry. I'm in the automotive industry. And I was fascinated by these things. And we know we need to change. Where can I learn more? Where can I do more? What can I do? So it's not just the younger generations. I have a lot of hope in the fact that many of our executive education students and alumni and senior managers are coming around to understand, the role of their companies in front of the world, really.
I would add one. I stepped down as dean recently. As dean, I think my counterparts would acknowledge that, well, I had high principles. My elbows were pretty sharp because my goal was to improve my school. But this collaboration, and there's another one that we're in the process of doing, which is a collaboration between us and HEC and University of Vancouver on climate change entrepreneurship. These are things that wouldn't have happened 10 years ago. I think we are coming together in really meaningful ways. And if a hyper-competitive dean like me can put down my sword and be proud of what everybody else is doing, I think there's something there that we can celebrate along with our junior folks. How do we make this real? BS4CL, which is a mouthful, Business Schools for Climate Leadership, starts with BS. How do we make sure that we're not full of hot air and just warming up the planet? And then how do we make sure that businesses are committed to this as well? But not just committed as a religious matter, committed in terms of action. Thoughts?
Peter, if I could, I think the thing is in the details. It's in the plans. I mean, one thing which is new is we have lots of CEOs making bold statements about the future. Now, whether that is green wishing, which is not the same as greenwashing, or whether it's real, depends upon whether the vice presidents in those companies can actually get budgets to do real stuff, whether the students that we're training can, will push them to do new stuff, whether they actually build that innovation, actually do the heavy lifting to make it happen. I think this is somewhere where we can collectively add a lot. And I think that's where we make sure it's real, by actually, helping the folks get the plans in place and make things happen. Right now, while COP's going on, our alumni association is having its global meeting in Madrid, and it's all about sustainability. And our people are just, they just want to learn how to do stuff. So I think if we can give them the tools, as Conchita says, and help them, move ahead, they'll because business has to. You asked, why does business care? None of our businesses will be here in 20 years if we don't fix this problem. The world's going to be too difficult to live in. It's going to be too dangerous to live in. If inequality goes rampant, as Mark Stiles, from INSEAD says, if people are left behind, they will vote for politicians who take us further behind. Yeah. So we really have to fix this stuff, and I think it's in business best interest to do the right thing.
Peter, I can add there too. I mean, I absolutely agree with Mike, but I remember our early conversations and we were asking ourselves, much like any smart business leader would, what is our distinctive capability here? What is our value add? What have we got that others don't have in these urgent conversations that we're all having right now? And one thing we recognized is we as business schools are also research led. So we're not just highly connected to the business community and training, we hope, the next generation of business leaders and other organizational leaders, but we are also research led, and we are embedded within institutions, larger universities that have extraordinary, astounding capacity to understand all of the complex issues that we've been talking about. So rather than be academics who say it's difficult and complex, we need to get out of our ivory towers and we need to say, here are the understandings we have that we can bring to bear on how you might understand, for example, your carbon pricing strategy or your risk mitigation, because these are the tools we have as academic researchers to actually contribute to part of the solution. And it's only, as you said, sort of building these bricks together that we build a solution and a set of insights together. So we need to collaborate, not just within our universities with other researchers, but also across our business schools and universities to create a sort of a critical mass of the essential knowledge.
Great, Jen. I think I can't summarize better than you have. So what I'd like to do then is to thank you, and Newt, and Concepcion, and Mike, and the deans, and the scores of others from LBS, from IE, from IESE, from Cambridge, from Oxford, from IMD, from HEC, and INSEAD, who've helped us start on this journey. We owe a special debt today to Intent, our partner for this event, on our participation at the Sustainable Innovation Forum. We share Intent's model to build bridges and connect people to address sustainability issues. We've only just begun, and there's a lot more work to be done. At Oxford, we focused a lot on Africa, and my African students taught me something that is a proverb that I never forget. If you want to walk fast, walk alone. If you want to walk far, walk together. We need to walk very far. Battling climate change is far too big for one government, one firm, or one school. So we need to walk together. But the issue is extraordinarily urgent. So we're going to have to walk fast too. We're going to have to walk together. So hopefully we can not only engage our communities, but also engage each other in this marathon or sprint. And in terms of marathons and sprints, I hope everybody enjoys the rest of the Sustainability Innovation Forum and the rest of this COP26. Thank you all for your great work, and there's more work to be done when COP is over. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you, Peter.
Thank you, Peter.
Thanks all.
Thank you.